Hi, my name is Dr. David Campt. I'm with the Dialogue Company, and I want to welcome you to session 6. Our focus is on bridging the divide with Agree and Confess. This is the VOICE project, which stands for Voters Organized to Influence Critical Elections. And this is our 6th session to try to explain compassion-based methods of interacting across different points of view. I want to have my partner in high crimes introduce herself.
Hi, David. My name's Karin Tamerius. I am the founder of Smart Politics, and my specialty is teaching people how to talk across political divides.
Great. Okay, thanks, Karin. So what we're going to do today is to drill down on the issue of fostering connectivity and agreement with somebody you have a difference of opinion with. So let's first talk about the review of today's half hour or so. We're going to do a quick review of the core method we've been teaching called the REACH method. I'm going to explain that. Then we're going to talk about how and why to agree with folks. The E in the A in the method is for agree, and then the C is for confess. We're going to talk about how and why to confess. And then we're going to do a role play, and then we'll take any questions that you might have. Okay. The REACH method, REACH stands for reflect, inquire, agree, confess, and harmonize. So reflect means calm down, inquire means ask questions, agree means agree, let somebody knows you agree with them. Confess, tell a story that emphasizes and underscores your agreement, and then harmonize to try to express your opinion through a story and try to help put together the alignment and the compatibility between what you've agreed with and your point of view. So that's what that means. So, so just to go into that in a little more depth, so the agree, in the agree step, again, you've relaxed, that's what the reflect step is. You've relaxed, you've rekindled, you've gotten ready for to have a different kind of encounter. Then there is inquire. You've asked questions. You've gotten the person to tell you a story that tries to convey why they feel like they feel through a story. That's so important to go beyond their belief to an experience or two that drives their belief. So reflect, inquire, and now today we're going to focus on and drill down on agree and confess. Agree has to do with you want to show alignment with the person, you want to convey to them you're aligned with them, you want to acknowledge how they look at the situation, and you want them to know that you accept them and their point of view. You don't think they're crazy is the point of that. Then you want to confess, and confess the C part of REACH, and that means to tell a story that shows them that you've already told them you agree, but you want to show them that you agree by telling them a story. Stories are more connecting. We've talked about that in the previous episode. It fires up our mirror neurons. We feel more aligned with the person if they tell us a story. So that's what you're doing in the confess step. Okay, so Karin is going to talk a little bit more about the why agree with folks who think you're wrong. So remember, you're talking across a divide. So some people are like, why I want to agree? There's reasons that you want to demonstrate agreement.
Thank you, David. Yeah, a lot of people are really discombobulated by this step initially because they're like, I disagree with this person. Why would I possibly want to tell them that I agree with them? So we're going to run through some quick ways to think about this. The first reason to tell people the ways in which you agree is to show them that you're not the enemy. A lot of times when we initially come to conversations across difference, we're starting from a place of hostility, a place where we have a lot of stereotypes about the other person. And if you're a Republican talking to a Democrat or a Democrat talking to a Republican, often the first thing you need to do is show them that you're not there to fight with them. The second reason, and this is related, is to reduce defensiveness. When we come to political conversations, often we are coming from a place of wanting to defend our worldview and make sure that other people accept our worldview and make sure that they don't change us in any way. And reducing defensiveness, making people feel comfortable, letting them know that you're not going to impose your view on theirs is important. And one way you can do that is by agreeing with them. The third reason it's really important to agree is to show that you're taking the other person's views seriously. A lot of times in conversations, we assume that the other person isn't actually listening to us or hearing us, because if they were listening, if they were hearing, then they would be finding areas of agreement. And so this is the way of showing them that, no, actually, I am hearing you. I am listening to you. I hear the parts of what you're saying that make sense, and I'm agreeing with those. The fourth reason is to show that you are not a totally biased, irrational, unreasonable person in this conversation. A lot of times in a dialogue, when we're speaking across difference, the assumption is that the other person has no idea what they're talking about, and no matter what I say, are they going to listen to my point of view. So to get other people to listen to you, you need to show them that you're willing to listen to them, and that you're willing to do that in a rational and unbiased way to the extent of your ability. The fifth reason that we agree is to form an alliance. The last thing we want in a political discussions is to be at odds. We don't want to fight with the person we're talking with. We want to show them that rather than being on opposite teams, we're actually on the same team confronting a problem together. And it is by agreeing and identifying common ground that alliance is formed. And finally, agreement is a way of offering a concession at the start of a conversation or negotiation that makes the other person feel a little bit of a debt. When I make a concession to you, the power of reciprocity is such that you feel like you should make a concession to me too. So it opens the door a little bit to priming the person for rethinking their beliefs. So David, do you want to go into exactly how to agree?
Sure. And I want to point out to people that in the Voice Project, we're talking about getting ready for an election, but the REACH method has value beyond political topics. It's a basic best practice and builds upon best practices in talking across disagreement. So while our examples are going to focus on politics because we're near the election season, my hope is that you take away from this that this method of trying to reach somebody has applicability outside the political context. So the art of agreement. A core thing to try to just have a consciousness of is that you want to agree with what you can. One friend of mine says that when you're trying to foster a good progress in one of these conversations, somebody says something you disagree with, you want to treat it basically the way that some people deal with trail mix, which is like you get rid of the seeds and you get rid of the crunchy stuff and you get rid of stuff that's good for you, looking for the chocolate, right? So what you're trying to do is to find the chocolate, find anything you can agree with in a statement that you have a lot of disagreement with. So agree with what you can is important. Now, one of the things that's important to remember is it's okay not to agree on policies, facts, or on politicians. You're actually not likely to find agreement if you disagree with somebody on that. So, but that doesn't mean you can't find agreement. We're going to talk about what you can find agreement on, but you don't have to try to find agreement on the policies they are in favor of, or the facts that they think are the most relevant facts, or the politicians that they identify with. If you're in a different ideology than somebody else, you're probably not going to agree on those. But there are things that you can agree on. So, for example, you can agree often on values. For example, gun control advocates and gun rights advocates often share an agreement on the value of safety. They just have different visions of how you create safety, right? They agree on that. People can agree, for example, on the importance of a clean environment, but people who tend to favor deregulation of business and environmental protectionists, they have different visions of what it means to have a healthy society with a good environment. So, but sometimes articulating the values that you might have in common with somebody that you disagree with on policies and facts is a useful connecting point. It makes you and the other person feel better and be more inclined to look for common ground by trying to, if you lift up the values, and if you can remind the person you have similar values, then you might be able to influence them more. Goals. It's similar to values. So you might agree, for example, and some of this has been done in important dialogue. So people who are pro-choice and pro-life often share the value of fewer abortions. That's a goal that they can share. So that's an example of you don't agree at the policy level, but there are goals that you share, right? So, and then finally, there's emotions. A lot of times, given the frustration level of our society, oftentimes this is a good arena to find common ground. People on the left and the right, for example, are all upset about or sad even about the polarization we have. People are often upset or frustrated at the government's non-responsiveness. So sometimes the way that you can sort of smooth the waters and make it easier to find common ground is to point out that you might have some common ground on emotions that are related to the topic you're talking about. Anything you want to add to that? Dr. Karin is a psychiatrist, so she knows more about some of this than I do. So I want to make sure before we move on that
I think you did a great job, David.
Okay.
Nailed it.
All right. So let's move on to why confess. Remember, that was agree. So we talked about the why and the how. So now we're going to go to the confess step. So the agree was to tell them that you agree. And then we're going to go further, but suggest that you confess. Would you tell a story that illustrates that? So Karen's going to talk about why one might do that.
Right. So now that you've told them that you agree, why do you need to go beyond and tell a confession story too? And the reason is, first of all, to show them that you empathize with their experience. One of the key differences between agreeing and confessing with a story is that agreement is a very cognitive process. It happens in the form of specific thoughts, and it doesn't really have an emotional impact by itself. But when you tell a story, you kind of hit people in the gut at an emotional level, and it shows them that you get where they're coming from in a way that just agreeing can't. So showing them that you empathize with their experience because you've had a similar experience is super powerful. The second thing a confess story does is it shows that you are like them, and you are a lot of times we assume that Republicans are one way and Democrats are another, and we have very little in common. In fact, we have a tremendous amount in common, even if we have different ideas about how the government should work. And telling a story where we demonstrate situations where we've felt essentially the same shows them how much we have in common.
Could you go back to that last slide? I want to say something more about that. I want to just talk a little bit about mirror neurons, because one of the things that stories do more than other ways of communicating is fire up our mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are parts of our brain that tend to emulate what we think is going on in somebody else's brain if we feel identified with them. So, and we've all seen contagious sneezes or contagious tears or contagious laughter. So, and we've seen us cry at movies, right? Where we're having emotions based on an image of somebody. So part of the value of confessing and showing agreement through a story is that you fire up their mirror neurons more than just agreeing. And you're showing that you're like them at a kind of a deeper level. And what that puts you in a better position to do is to influence them later when you get to further steps down the line.
Right. As Jonathan Haidt says, the brain is a story processor, not a logic processor, right? So when you put something in a story form, you feel it emotionally, whereas facts and numbers don't move you. So the third reason to tell a confess story is to reduce defensiveness. Just like the agree step reduces defensiveness, so too does telling a story. And that really comes in the confession step. That really is about the level of vulnerability that you're engaging in. When you tell a story, you're confessing to a time when you felt the same way too, and maybe when you made a mistake. So the fourth reason is to talk with the other person's elephant. And just to explain to you what this means, Jonathan Haidt says that the human brain is kind of divided in the same way that a rider of an elephant and an elephant are divided. And he says that the elephant is like our gut level intuitions and emotions, and the rider is like our cognitive mind and our thinking mind and our logical mind. And he says the thing is, the rider thinks they're in control of the elephant, but the reality is that if the elephant decided to take off and move somewhere else, that the rider wouldn't have any ability to stop them. And in fact, most of the time, the elephant is in charge, not the person who's riding the elephant. We think we're in charge, but really the emotions are going whatever way they want to go. And we can kind of negotiate around the edges a little bit. One of the beauties of sharing conversations is it gives us the ability to talk with the elephant, the emotional part of the other person, rather than talking with the cognitive part. So the agree step is really talking to the rider. The confess story step is talking to the elephant. If you can get both of those things into alignment, then you can move them in a new direction. And the fifth reason for having for sharing confess stories is that it demonstrates a certain vulnerability. A lot of times when you make a confession about something that you've done in the past that might not have been the greatest idea, where you've made a mistake, that can really get the other person to feel for you, and they will want to help you out. And it's actually by extending trust to someone else to make yourself vulnerable that they will feel like making themselves vulnerable too. And it's only once all of those defenses are down and people are feeling vulnerable but connected, safe with the other person, that change can happen in a conversation.
All right, so let's talk about, tell you a little bit about the art of confession, and then we're going to do a role play so y'all can see what we're talking about. So I'm just going to, so there's a couple different types of confession that's important to lift up. So imagine you're in a conversation with somebody, you disagree with them, and you've reflected, you've calmed down, you've asked them for a story, you've inquired, and then you've agreed with them, and now you're confessing. So you don't agree with their position, but you're trying to tell them a story that will help you identify with them. So one type of story is a time when you thought and felt exactly the same way. So in terms of on policies, what this can be is the exceptional case. So for example, suppose I'm a liberal person who is, and we're in a discussion about gun control. And I tend to believe that we need to have fewer guns and we have more government regulation of guns. So the other person is a gun rights advocate. So we are disagreeing on what is true generally. And one of the things that can be useful for me to do is to confess a time in which their position was right, and I felt like they feel. So for example, there was a time in which I was outside a club and it was getting a little bit rowdy. And then like a guy showed up, and it was unclear whether he was security now, but he obviously had a gun, and like things calmed down. Even though I'm in favor of gun control, that's an instance in which I was happy that a civilian had a gun. So admitting to something like that is going to be helpful when I'm talking to a conservative, so they can know I don't think their position is completely crazy. We could reflect that. Suppose I was a conservative person talking to a liberal person, same conversation. And even though I'm in favor of gun rights, if there's been a situation in which a domestic abuser, for example, had a gun, and I really thought that wasn't good, I might bring that example up, even though it's, in my mind, the exceptional case, because it makes the liberal person feel like, okay, they don't think I'm completely an idiot. So again, one type of confession is a time when you thought and felt exactly the same way, even though you might look at that as the exceptional case, and they look at that as the general case. Another mode of confessing is a time when you felt similar about a parallel situation. So suppose, for example, I'm a liberal person talking to a conservative person. We're having a disagreement about racism and how common it is and what one should do. And they make their point that oftentimes claims of racism against people are inaccurate. They think that people are over accused. So one of the things I might do to try to, again, build the connectivity through a confession, if I've seen a situation where somebody was falsely accused of sexual misconduct, essentially a false accusation was made, and I identify with that, even though it's not exactly racism, I might bring that up to let them know I have felt like they feel in a different situation. It's a parallel situation. So that's one example. Or going the other way. Suppose I'm a conservative person. I tend to not favor government regulation, but I have seen a situation in which I was in a community, I maybe even saw a television program. I saw something like this over the weekend. I see a situation in which like a whole bunch of people have cancer in the community, and there's a toxic site nearby. And I think in that situation, man, something should be done about that. So again, it's not exactly the same as the situation we're talking about government regulation, but in that particular case, I feel like that. So those are just two ways of trying to confess that and tell a story so the other person feels that you don't think they're crazy. Okay, so in our remaining 7 minutes, let's do a role play. So
we're a little low on time. That's good to know.
Okay, all right. So in this role play, I'm going to be a conservative person, and we're going to have a conversation about the whole masking issue. So, and Karen's going to be a liberal person, and we're going to talk about that. Okay.
So, David, you were saying that you're upset about the wearing of the masks.
Oh yeah, I think that this is like way overdone. I think that the way that people are like clamping down on people is constricting the economy, and it's constricting people's freedom. I think that we need to be trusted to make good decisions about our health, and I think that the way that some of these governors are just reaching down, and like in Michigan for a while, that governor Whitman was like cutting down on people boating. Come on now, boating. The nature of boating is not near other people. So I just think that it's just a reflection of a kind of a takeover. But some people want to just take over all of our lives, and I think that we need to. I'm really against that.
Wow. Okay. Well, it sounds like you have strong feelings about this.
I do. I have feelings about that. I think the government overreaches the problem.
Really
we need to fight it.
Yeah. So this is what I hear you saying, David. I hear you saying that that you've got some anger about what's happening. You think there's government overreach, and you're not totally sure that this is necessary, and you're concerned that it might be actually impeding people's ability to vote and do other things that, you know,
other things are more frequent than voting. It's just like our government hands in our lives is just way too much.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, I am totally in agreement with you about the need for us as citizens to be very vigilant about our freedoms. That, you know, we don't want government controlling our lives. And there's always a trade-off, right, between government doing things that's good for society and government doing too much.
Yeah, and in addition, that is correct. And in addition, like they're overly kind of cautious. Like I said, that government was too cautious. So in addition, that the government overreach is just like, who's setting the standards of how cautious we should be? Like the government bureaucrats make a decision. We're overdoing it and forcing us to a level of caution that's just paranoid and not healthy. So both of those are true.
Yeah. So I detect a little bit of ambivalence. Like, you want to be safe from COVID, and at the same time, you don't want the government to be crazy, right?
Right.
And I do not want my government to be crazy either. And this kind of reminds me of a few years ago, my friend had a baby, and the baby was really premature. Like, baby had to stay in the hospital for several months after it was born. And when it finally came home, my friend was like hyper vigilant about protecting the baby from infection. Like, nobody could come over to the house or see the baby unless they'd, you know, promised that they'd had their vaccinations, and unless they promised they weren't sick. And even if you came into the house, like, you had to immediately wash your hands and take all of these precautions. And I was thinking about that recently in relation to this COVID thing. And at the time, like, I used to think, like, that's crazy. You know, she's being hyper vigilant, but at the same time, it was a baby, you know, we take sacrifices in order to protect human life. And,
of course.
And so when she asked me, I was willing to do it. And in some ways, it's not that different with COVID, I think, because there are a lot of premature babies out in the world who got COVID.
Or all the people who are really subject to getting sick.
Or people with cancer who are immune suppressed, or elderly people. Like, and so when I think about that, I don't quite mind so much that wearing a mask is really unpleasant and stressful. So anyway,
I got it. That's interesting. I got it.
Yeah. So
all right, scene. All right. So thank you, Karin.
Yeah.
So I believe that we have at least one question in the chat. I like the idea of agreeing on values. I often find it hard to identify shared values. For example, you brought up abortion and gun rights. Do you have a list of hot button issues and related values?
You know what? I think a great place to go for this is Jonathan Haidt's work. If Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist,
Haidt.
Haidt, yeah, who has written a number of books and done tons of research on the foundations of human morality, and has basically identified what core values are, and has even looked at differences between liberals and conservatives. So what are the values that conservatives most often subscribe to, and what are the values that liberals most often subscribe to? And that can be really helpful in a conversation.
I got you. I think that's right. I was just looking up. I think that there's a group called Search for Common Ground that has a long track record of trying to navigate the abortion issue, I believe, as well as some other issues. So that might be another resource. But I think that's a great question. Do we have a list of hot button issues and related values? I don't have that list right away, but I would say that I base a lot of my work on Jonathan Haidt's work too. I think it's really valuable. And part of what I try to do is to train people to think about the values that the conservative, if they're conservative, what are the values that liberals tend to emphasize? If they're liberal, what are the values conservatives tend to emphasize? So that can be useful to review his work on that as well. And also I lay that out in my book, Compassion Transforms Contempt, which lays this reach method out too. It's in the context of this election, but it has applicability broader than that. So it's 101, and I just wanted, before we close, I just want to say a couple things. So one of the things that people should know about is, even though this is the Voice Project, a initiative of the Dialogue Company. Dialogue Company is doing we have two things. One, we have a online course for if you want to deal with racial issues called the Race Method 101. It's an online self-paced video course that you can use even just on your own, videos and worksheets to kind of like understand how to use the method in race work. I call the reach method, the race method, reflect, ask, connect, expand. Same method basically. And so you can learn that method and get some guidance about how to do that. So that's one thing you should know about. And then also in January, we have a new cohort of the Doing My Part as an Anti-Racism Ally that we will be starting in January. And you are welcome and invited to go to thedialoguecompany.com and join that. People have found that not only is it useful for people's work as allies, but it actually it has applicability more broadly because we're teaching universal methods of conflict resolution and persuasion. So I want to thank everybody for participating. Somebody asked, would you typically spend more time on the agree stuff than you did in the role play? Yeah. That role play is done because we were supposed to get out of here but in a half hour and we put you overtime. But yeah, in the actual process, you spend much more time on that because it's you want to essentially soften the person up and create the groundwork for some for your harmonized step where you really try to influence the person. A lot of times the core mistake people make when disagreements come up is they go right to the attempt to influence them and not try to understand them, not try to hear their stories. So yes, you might go through the inquire, agree, confess step multiple times before you try to move to harmonize. So you are exactly correct. So thank you all so much. We're going to do a rebroadcast tonight at 8:00 Eastern. So feel free to tell your friends about it and come back, and we'll try to monitor the chat and answer questions at that point. Come back for our watch party. So thank you all so much, and we'll see you for our final one of these is next week, isn't it, Karin? So we'll see y'all next week, if not tonight. Thanks a lot.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.